Welcome everybody to the Evermore Studio, and for those who saw the grand reveal, you'll have noticed there was a very empty sofa to one side, and I thought, do you know what, I know exactly who I want to appear on that sofa. And she was very gracious to accept, and it's a heck of a guest, and she deserves a heck of an intro. She is a silver vixen. She is the Philippa Schofield, the Paula Hollywood, the Martina Kemp, the Helen Mirren of InsurTech. She's in her prime and definitely suspect. It is the wonderful Kirstin Duffield of Morning Data. Kirstin, welcome.
Thank you, Ed. I'm really not sure how one follows from that opening, but thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be the first on your sofa.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. I wanted to get someone to sit on it. It was one of those things that it just became an obsession about. There's a sofa there. I need to work out how I can get someone to be sat on it. And you have graciously accepted, so thank you. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject. So we've all heard those fateful words. We're going to build it ourselves.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel as a vendor when you hear those words, Kirstin?
Well, I sort of want to grab them by the collar and shake them whilst smiling graciously and respecting their decision. So it can be a little bit of, dual personality moment, I think. I think that's really the challenge. It might depend on when in the process they launch that bombshell. You know, if it's at the beginning, then you have every opportunity to obviously talk them through why that might not be such a good idea. If it's right at the end, the collar moment kicks in.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think it is that people underestimate so badly how actually arduous that journey is going to be?
I think the buyer has changed, and perhaps 10, 20 years ago, the buyer would have been much more an IT director who has been a coder, deployed systems, a DBA perhaps. And that means that they do end up with a problem when you now have buyers that are not from that kind of background. So if you've now got brokers, front-end users, it's all in expectation. It's what they're used to on their handheld devices or on their iPads. So they assume that will be easy. You know, a 56p download, is what we've all become accustomed to. And I think really understanding what goes into software design and how likely a project is to succeed or fail based on lots of other people having tried it, I think it's an eye-opening statistic. In fact, the Standard Group's ironically called Chaos Report 2020, only 8% of large software build your own projects succeeded. I mean, that's frightening. I mean, we're not talking like, it's a 50-50 chance. You're talking about pretty negligible success rates. And even when one's talking about a small project, then you're still talking about 1 in 10 failing. So somewhere in between, the statistics don't really support that choice.
And even on those smaller ones, I guess one of the things that we've spoken a lot about on Chatterbox and some of the other content I've done is around low code. And do you think this kind of low code movement that's around at the moment is giving a perception of it being a lot easier to do this kind of thing than it actually is?
Maybe the perception. I mean, certainly as soon as somebody sees, you can write code by drawing squares and triangles on a screen, then yes, it could perhaps go or give that kind of impression. But you still need the methodology. You still need the security model. You still need developers to actually put the links in, the APIs from the low code into your core system, if that's what you're trying to achieve. And that's where I think low code really has a stage to occupy. I think it's around smaller apps and point solutions. So where you might focus your differentiator, what makes you different, maybe around customer service or automation, about building your ecosystem around your core system in the middle. But why would you reinvent the wheel of a ledger system, for example? it really does seem you're biting off. Well, there's plenty of corpses littering that road, let's say.
Corpses littering the road. I like that one a lot. Absolutely. And what's the biggest mistake you see that people make along that journey?
I think it's linear development. So my view is the original agile, so to speak. I'm sure there'll be plenty of developers out there that might call me to task over that, trolling please. But I think agile is really about ever decreasing circles of approximation. So you build something and you get feedback from it, and then you will build more and you'll then polish around the edges. I think unless you are really skilled at doing that, understanding that you're creating the middle of a system first and then building out, rather than starting at, well, where do we want to start the journey? What's the user going to see when they log in? Big mistake. That's not how you write software.
So I've got a slightly tougher question that's going to put you on the spot. Do you think this kind of failure within the insurance industry is an insurance-specific issue? Is it down to the lack of digital skills we have, or is it a wider issue in commerce as a whole?
Don't start me on the lack of digital skills. I'm a great supporter of STEM subjects. I mentor in schools, I do presentations, all sorts of things. It's incredibly frustrating to see. It's like a world where development's all around gaming, or it's all around, it's all around the sort of fast moving stuff. So people think insurance isn't exciting. And so why would they go into creating an insurance system? It doesn't seem to, leap off the page in something as a career choice, much the same as we struggle with getting people into the insurance industry at the practitioner end as well. But is it purely down to lack of digital skills, or is it perhaps in the London market more to do with a very strong market that have really seen vendors as outsiders, and they haven't seen them so much as partners? They certainly used to. It has changed. I'll give credit to many people in Lloyd's and 𝒉𝒂𝒗𝒆 and the LMA, etc., who have all done a huge job in breaking down those barriers. But up until this time, there has really been a theory that, we'll keep vendors at arm's length. We'll tell them what we'll tell them what they want, or what we want, but then we'll also, this is the bit I have a problem with, we'll also solutionize and we'll tell them how to do it. I don't tell an underwriter how to underwrite. I don't tell a broker how to broke. And so really neither of them should tell us how to write a software system.
I think it's fair to say that it's quite a combative relationship between vendor and buyer in the insurance market. It always feels like that to me.
It has been. It's something I didn't like. I'm not that kind of person as an individual. So I certainly have spent a great deal of time trying to create a culture of collaboration. So our user group, for example, are all invited in together. They're not sort of discriminated against by size or anything like that. So I've tried to get them to think about what it is the market is asking of them, and therefore what could be solved by an IT solution. So, how could we solve that problem for you? And let's group together and think about it on a bigger scale. And I'm not sure other vendors have quite mastered it. It is a tough call, I'll give you that. But I think there's a sort of vendor to one client relationship, and I'm sure many very healthy, very constructive. But there's the idea that it's all about getting a single champion, getting one client to back what you're going to do, and then hope that the others will fall in line. Well, I'm not sure. I think it perhaps needs to be a little bit more, build it and they'll come, certainly amongst a market where the IT skills are struggling, certainly at the level that they need to be to design software, not perhaps in using spreadsheets. Certainly many underwriters could outstrip me on using a spreadsheet very easily. But I think getting the idea about how you write efficient, repeatable code is an art, and something that, takes years to develop. So we should be writing the code and providing the client with the outcomes that they're looking for.
And why do you think there is such a lack of digital skills in the insurance industry specifically?
Um, well, I'm hoping. Well, I'm dreading the fact that I might be right. But I'm watching. I mean, I've got two young adults myself, 20, nearly 23, 21, and I saw them go through school. And the idea of a database was an Excel spreadsheet, and to write a web page would be using Publisher.
Mm,
So if we're not going right back to looking at the 12, 13-year-olds or even younger, then we're not instilling the idea that a computer code, a piece of code, could solve a problem. That's perhaps another area low code can seriously come to bear, where kids can build apps. I mean, that could really inspire them. But then making that sort of leap from building an app that might be useful to an influencer of state-of-the-art headphones or sort of the latest fashions is not quite the leap of getting, build an app that will be state-of-the-art customer service or subjectivities tracking app, for example. And that I think we need to address by going into schools, by making it more, should I say, fun, or at least interesting.
mm. Do you think insurance has got a bit of a PR issue in terms of the reputation, and I hate this word, but I'm going to have to use it, the kind of sexiness of it as an industry? It's not very exciting. It's not very alluring. It's not
No.
very. It doesn't seem to attract. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think I think that's very, very close to the mark. I think, how can we make this industry much more interesting? I mean, all of our team, for example, do their CII courses. I mean, the developers, the accounts team, everybody, much perhaps to their annoyance in their early months with us. But when we do sessions with them, Monday and Friday lunchtimes, we all now obviously on a Teams call, and we sort of say, well, what would happen with Tiger Woods crashing his vehicle, for example? Was that, did that have moral hazards or physical hazards coming to bear? And this is where you can put a reality around a piece of news. Or today, the oil tanker that did a 3-point turn in the Suez Canal. Which part of the insurance policy would be starting to be looked at first in that scenario? I think that helps people relate to their real world. And I'm not sure insurance. Why do youngsters not look at life insurance till later in life? If they've not got a car, they're not interested in car insurance. If they haven't bought a house, they're not interested in house insurance. So how do we get it into their lives?
I think that's always been my objection with this kind of CII training. It's excellent in part at teaching you the theory, but I was really lucky. I worked at Allianz and they had a great program on this. We had a great trainer, a guy called Alan Chandler, who I'm going to shout out because he was excellent. And he's a lovely chap as well. And I think you train in a similar way to him, right? That he took the kind of quite dry content that's just on a page and made it, like the Tiger Woods example, relevant to the real world, relevant to. I get that that's what it says, but how is that relevant to me? How is it interesting to me? How am I going to engage with that to really understand it? Because otherwise, you just get that kind of classic thing where it's just words on a page, and you know how
Yeah.
to regurgitate them, but do you really understand them?
Yeah, I totally agree. And, learning about limits and deductibles and excesses is really dry as a subject, or at least I should say dry to many. There are obviously some people who find it extremely engaging. But if you're trying to convince somebody to get engaged so that when a problem comes up with a client where they're saying, I want to allow my system to log down the fact that there's going to be a subjectivity on this policy. And I want it to tell me when that subjectivity is going to expire, and also that a reminder is sent out to the insured to satisfy that subjectivity. Again, even that sounds pretty dry. But if you can sort of say, well, actually, just remember that this policy is only going to be enforced if you go away, dig out the bottom of the drawer and find that fire certificate and scan it in on your handset and then upload it to this app, which goes, fantastic, well done, full marks, and your subjectivities have been satisfied. Even that is mildly more sexy and engaging than just reading the letters off, the words off the page.
Absolutely. So we've digressed slightly. So I want to take this back to this talk of kind of launching your own systems and going into that project. And as a software vendor, tell me what are the key advantages you have of actually buying off the shelf rather than going and trying to configure something yourself?
Well, economies of scale is definitely the biggest thing. I think people think that the cost of building your own stops when you actually deliver the solution. We have been going over 30 years, and I'm occasionally asked, well, when will it be finished? No, because as long as the FCA keep changing the regulations, or we have Brexit, or we have GDPR, or any of the other, or new apps to build in and integrate with, the London market, future at Lloyd's, so projects, so, new placing platforms, the core data record, all these things are a changing landscape against which we will develop. So if a company was to think about developing their own now, not only do they have to understand all of the common standards, so would they decide to immediately understand all of the Accord standards, for example, and that's just the standard, never mind the functionality. So you've got the economies of scale of joining a community when you buy off the shelf in that sense. The trick is, can you buy off the shelf, but can you feel as though you have just walked out in a designer suit? Now, if you choose a supplier, a vendor who has a proven track record, who has a huge knowledge base, that's going to be key, because the end user is going to ask you or ask the vendor, how do I do X? They've got to have a platform that is already fully hosted, proven track record, and is got the security models, and it's got pen testing, all these elements that the regulators are so hot on at the moment. Then talking about regulators, you've got all the regulatory reporting, and they will change, they will morph, they will develop. All of these things never stop. So once you have asked a software house to build you a system, not only do you need to know all of that, and you've got nobody else to ask, because you're the client and the software vendor's just waiting for the spec, or can you team together as a collaboration with others and address some of these market changes and think about how to do it? And then the code is only coded once, and then it's appreciated by all those, so you can spread the cost of it. So if a particular functionality of connecting into white space was going to cost you, let's say, £15,000 worth of development, that's going to be spread amongst all of the Novus users for our system, or else you've got to brunt that £15,000 yourself. It's a pretty basic set of concepts in terms of one-off development costs, the continuing development costs, and the economy scale of doing it amongst a community.
I think the most interesting one you touch on there that kind of sits closest to me is that principle of, if you do it on your own, you lose out on all that expertise and all the lessons that have already been learnt by the vendor that you go with. They've made the mistakes for you. They know what works. They know what doesn't. It always, I look at the kind of quick to market systems that are out there, particularly I came from a schemes background, and you can put schemes together really quickly. And one of the things I've always said is, why would you want to build your scheme yourself? Because actually you're an underwriter. Do tell me, what experience have you got in user experience and UI, and what makes a good customer journey, and what makes a good quote and buy journey? And the same kind of applies to what you're doing, that actually ultimately we're underwriters. We come from insurance background. We're naturally very risk averse. Partnering with the right partner who has all that experience and can help us contextualize what we're trying to achieve as an insurance entity, be it a broker, an MGA, an insurer, reinsurer, whatever it might be, but to take all of that stuff that we're trying to achieve and contextualize that into an IT perspective, that seems a massive part to be missing from the engagement, and a real loss to the project, right?
Yeah, I think it's highly underrated, and is probably almost the single biggest factor. Technology and the code you're writing, or the language you're writing, is going to change. You might decide to swap out an Oracle database and use a SQL Server database, or you might want to, sort of code in React versus, VB.NET or C#. That's all going to move, and that's another aspect. If you ask a software vendor to write your software for you, build your own, you have to decide which technology is going to best fit your decision. But then what about if that technology is now no longer supported? You've now got to do a rewrite. And the overhead of sort of legacy aspects, and when we talk about legacy system, Ed, you and I have even been talking to each other previously about legacy not being a dirty word. But I can't think of anything faster that will happen with a build your own than it fast becoming a legacy system. And if that vendor was to go out, software supplier was to go out of business, then you haven't got a network to fall back on. You know, what about putting your coded escrow? You know, what about all of these things that you start thinking about that are much bigger than just the functionality of a button here or a workflow there? So I think it's underestimated just how much of a nightmare continuous development philosophy, a methodology about how you do your coding, how you test it, how you document it, all of that has got to be built in. And as you say, if a vendor's already done it in the backdrop, in the landscape of insurance and insurance broking or insurance underwriting, then they've pretty well, you know, they've bruised their knuckles already on this, and you're coming along and benefiting from all of that knowledge.
And let's look at this. We've got to be completely unbiased on this. So there must be some benefits, or what are the negatives even of going off the shelf with a solution? What are the things that maybe drive people in the first place to go down that let's build it ourselves route?
I think when people are tackling multiple jurisdictions, sometimes they can feel that a supplier that supplies a traditionally US system or a traditionally UK system, they feel it might not be able to adapt to Dubai regulations or to Australian regulations, or the processes. You know, French accounting is different. Multi-language, even on your labels on the screens, all these kinds of things. And so I can see there's a temptation there, which they perhaps I would love to be able to speak totally frankly and say, perhaps the vendor of the off-the-shelf system hasn't understood the vision, hasn't told the story about how much potential the client could have if they bought off the shelf. And that's a failing in our sort of selling functionality over vision and story and all that kind of thing. So I think beneficially, if you're big enough and you have a captive IT company and you recruit your own developers, then potentially it could be viable. I could see where that might work. And if you don't have to talk to outside systems that are changing all the time, then potentially that might be another way. So at the moment, the London market does have the future at Lloyd's, changing requirements, you know, sort of even the data models aren't published yet, etc. So that's where I think buying off the shelf has its strength. What I do think is, going back to your point earlier about low code, that I think is the big build your own market. So get your core system. Don't reinvent the wheel. Nobody needs to reinvent a ledger. Nobody needs to reinvent setting up a policy, setting up a quote. Even the workflow to go from quote to policy to bind to issue documentation, that's all been done. Don't reinvent the wheel, even in foreign languages, even in, you know, a slightly different order in which you're going to do it. But if you're wanting to create a external facing customer service app, or you're wanting to allow subjectivities to be loaded onto a user portal and then for them to talk to your core system, build your own. That's your differentiator. That's your way of talking directly to your insureds. And that I can see really where low code should really explode. And vendors like us should be, as we are, welcoming that with open arms. We should be designing with our developers the APIs to allow all this low code to really flex its muscles.
And typically, how does the total cost of ownership compare across the two?
Well, of course, if you're taking the quote that your software writer is going to issue you about how to deliver this project, and you think that that's the end, then you could look at the fact that the ownership and the sense of ownership, that sort of idea of it's mine, and I can go in and tap the machine on the top and say, that's my code, then I would possibly say that it's about equal. But if you then build in the success rates, there's no context. There's no contest at all. If you look at the propensity, the likelihood it's going to fail, and the rescue job you're going to be required to do, then that cost of ownership's just going to rocket. Never mind, if it had been successful, your cost of ownership of your legacy upgrade, are you carrying any of that as a weight, or even as your intangible assets? Are your intangible assets going to depreciate because you've got this issue of it being out of date? I think it's difficult enough for people to understand what an intangible asset is. You can't touch it. If you own a printing machine, the accountant can come along and see it. They can actually say, we know what it's worth. We bought it 3 years ago. That's what it's worth. Your intangible assets are the brains of your developers, the collective good of and skills from the last 30 years of working out what works, working out how to do a Solvency II report and earn to incurred, how to do month end and yet cater for policies that are still in a source currency and haven't been converted into a banking currency. And they're just the easy ones. If you get into the world of funding or, sort of wanting to look at policies that are sort of, 10-year policies and have investment plans behind them, those start to get more complicated. And I think that cost of ownership, well, that's that collar shaking moment. It's not something I can put a spreadsheet in front of them and say, this is what it will cost you to build your own versus this is what it will cost you if you buy from us or buy from one of our competitors. Because there's so many unknown unknowns. That's the problem.
And to kind of finish on that sentiment, if there was any one thing that you could say to someone who's thinking about going out and building their own platform, building their own solution, what would that thing be?
Buy yourself a software house that's already done it. Then you can claim you built your own, but you're actually inheriting X number of years of all of the knowledge. That's pretty well the only way I could feel as though the majority of projects at that larger core system scale would be successful. You've even got software houses themselves who are not 100% successful and are still learning and still have issues. And that's all they do.
Well, thank you very much. That is our parting word to you. Go and buy a software house.
Go and buy a software house.
Just money down the back of your sofa. Just go and buy one of them. But no, thank you very much, Kirstin. I think it was a fascinating chat about a really interesting topic that I think time and time again I've heard those words, and every time I hear them it just fills me with dread. I've seen projects where I remember once upon a time I sat there with a client and their web guys were in the room with us. We were a SaaS platform all online and their web guys sat in on the demo, and I remember walking out of that demo and turning to my colleague and going, they're going to say that they can build this and we're not going to get the deal. And lo and behold, a week later, I get the call that, well, our web guys looked at it and they said they didn't think it was all that complex and they're going to have a go at it themselves. And you just kind of sat there and you went, there's two of them. We've got a team of 10.
I don't see how it gets past. I don't see how it gets past their risk assessment. How could you put your core system for every bit of your operation in the hands of 2 web designers? So I think that in itself. I mean, never mind the PI insurance. Never mind all of the infrastructure. Never mind deciding, we'll just put it in the cloud. These things are big challenges, and I think, you're absolutely right. It is frightening. We've seen it so often. It's not to say that there are not many talented developers out there, but developing in the insurance space is not solely about programming or coding or development. It's about knowledge and experience. And I think that is a tough buy. There are not many people in this market. I could probably count them with the fingers of 1.5 hands who know how an insurance IBA ledger works inside, and they're probably all over the age of 45. So where the next generation of people are coming from that would understand how that works, be able to continue it, is frightening. So education back into the next generation is absolutely key.
I think that the interesting point you made there is that they wouldn't understand how it would work inside. And I think that's the key of everything. Is on the surface, what you do, what everyone else in your space does, it looks simple. It looks like, oh, we just click
like
there and then it does this.
yep. It's a swan, isn't it? It is
Yeah.
elegantly going along the top and literally frantically, if you walk into, not this office at the, sorry, I'm not in the office, I'm in the studio. Obviously, if you walked into my office in my development, it is empty at the moment. But if I jump up and down hard enough, all the screens suddenly pop into life. And I can actually know that there is an engine of 20 odd people who are pouring their expertise over few lines of code to make a particular functionality integrate and to work seamlessly. And it is literally like pedaling under the water frantically to make sure this is secure, robust, that will follow, will error elegantly. 80% of a job of coding is dealing with the error catching. Never mind the happy path. You've got the unhappy path so that the client doesn't get caught in a loop and all those standard stuff. So yeah, pedaling fast and looking like a graceful swan, silver swan, as you said, from above the water.
Well, we will leave you with the thought of a swan. That's Kirstin's parting sentiment. Imagine her as a swan, and imagine Morning Data as the swan that's there. But thank you very much, Kirstin, for this. It's been very, very enjoyable. If you've enjoyed this, if this is the content that you like, then please smash that like button. Yes, I'm going to do it on every single video from now on. I've got to have the little hand in there and everything. But please smash that like button. Please drop down in the comments below. Have you successfully managed to build a platform yourselves from the ground up? What did you learn along the way? Have you had one of those disaster projects? Whatever it may be, please talk to us about it below. We want to hear about it. And so does the rest of the insurance market. We want to learn about these things. Please subscribe to the channel. Please share this with whoever you want. But for now, thank you, Kirstin.
My pleasure.
And we will see you on the next one.
Well, you're a glutton for punishment, staying all the way to the end, but I really appreciate it. Now, if you want more content like this, please make sure to subscribe over here, somewhere. Am I anywhere near it? Not sure. Or watch one of the extra videos up here. Peace! Pretty gangster. Yeah, I'll be on that TikTok soon. Definitely.